Welcome to Pride Book Fest. I'm Bree, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a 5th grade teacher and avid book reader. I'm so excited to bring you our panel today on writing middle grade fiction. Today we're going to talk all about the craft and creation of powerful middle grade queer stories, and I'm excited to introduce our panelists.
I think I'm first. Hi, my name is Jake Maya Arlo. My pronouns are she and they. And my debut novel, Almost Flying, I guess this is going to be on June 11th. So it will have come out. It comes out on June 8th. And it's about a queer roller coaster road trip that the main character takes with her future stepsister and crush. It's a fun summer read.
Hi, I'm Chad Lucas. My pronouns are he and him. My debut novel is Thanks a Lot Universe. Came out in May. And it's the story of two boys, Brian and Ezra. Brian's going through a bit of a family crisis. And Ezra, his basketball teammate, notices and wants to help, but also isn't sure if he's ready to reveal that he has a crush on Brian. So the two of them kind of have to figure out their friendship together.
Hi, I'm Clarabelle Ortega. I'm the author of Ghost Squad, which is like Coco meets Stranger Things, a Halloween adventure, two best friends on bikes trying to send evil spirits back into the underworld before the full moon on Halloween, and the upcoming This Is Our Rainbow anthology, which is the first middle grade LGBTQIA+ anthologies coming out this October. I'm really super excited for it, and I have Witchlings coming out next year in February too. Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Malik Pancholi. I am the author of The Best at It, which is about 12-year-old Indian American Rahul Kapoor, who's just beginning to realize that he might be gay, and he's doubting his self-worth. He has a pretty amazing conversation with his grandfather, and after that conversation, he decides that if he can just prove to the world that he is the best at something, all of his other problems will disappear. But he's got two major obstacles, and one is he has no idea what he's going to be the best at, and the second one is that he is terrified of what's going to happen if he doesn't succeed. So that's the book, and I'm so excited to be on this panel with all of you who I love and respect so much.
Hi, my name is Andrew Sess. I write under my initials AJ. My pronouns are he and they, and I'm the author of the middle grade contemporary novel Anna on the Edge, which is about a competitive ice skater who is navigating a non-binary gender identity, both on and off the ice. Like Clarabelle, I also have a story coming out, and This Is Our Rainbow this October. And my next standalone is called Ellen Outside the Lines, and it's coming out next spring.
I'm kind of geeking out here, and I have to say my students are pretty jealous that I get to talk with you. So thank you so much for being here. I kind of wanted to kick us out here. In any book, the main character is one of the most important pieces of the writing. And I think a lot of times, like we as adults, we kind of tend to really think that kids are more one-dimensional in their worldviews. But really, like, kids are so complex, and especially middle graders are really coming into their own. And they want the voices in their books to kind of reflect their complex worlds. So how do you craft authentic middle grade characters? Like, what are the ingredients of a character and voice that you're thinking about as you sit down to write?
I can go first. I realized I forgot to say my pronouns. They are she, they. And for me, I remember when I was, like 11, 12. And the big thing for me was like seeing the problems happening around my family, because kids really do notice what's happening and they want to help in their own way, but there's this like helpless feeling because everyone's telling you how no all the time and all the things that you can't do, right? And setting all these boundaries. So I try to start from a place of, I have a big problem that I need to solve, right? As the kids in my story, how would they go about solving it in with the tools that they've been given, with the things that they've been told that they're allowed to do, and a lot of times the things they've been told they're not allowed to do. So I really start from there, from the feeling of the world is so big and so scary, but I still have so much hope that things can get better. Because that's what I love about middle grade, right? The hope that is it in middle grade books. So that's the place that I start from and sort of like branch out from there.
Yeah, I'll build off on that. Yeah, for me, I think it's a lot of the things that Clarabelle just mentioned. But what do they really care about? What is this kid passionate about? Sometimes it can be more than one thing. And then also, what has the world already told them or taught them? Whether that's their family, sometimes their race, their gender, their sexuality can influence that, because the world sends lots of messages about those things. But those are a couple of the things that I think about when I'm developing my characters.
I think in terms of voice too, I agree with everything Chad and Clarabelle said. In terms of voice, I try to think of what my character is passionate about and how they see the world as a result of that. As an example, since my character is a skater and is really into figure skating, a lot of the way that she describes things relate to skating. Like her best friend Tamar, she says she changes topics faster than I spin and stuff like that. So like when crafting a voice, it has to ring true to the character themselves. Like your character wouldn't describe things in a way that maybe someone who's interested in soccer would if they're a figure skater, or if they're not into sports at all, they probably wouldn't use sports analogies.
Yeah, I think also for me, just remembering that middle school was the time in my life when I felt the most unabashedly, just every feeling that I had was 1,000% of that feeling. And sometimes I wish I could go back there, and I think it's exciting to write. I mean, I'm glad I'm not in middle school, but it's exciting to write middle grade because you get to remember what it feels like to have all those feelings. And I think a lot of times it's so easy as an adult to forget the giant, very real, unironic feelings that you had as a kid, and to take those seriously and think about how those giant feelings would impact your main character's life or the life of the people they're talking to, even if they're seemingly over dramatic or a little chaotic. I think that's always where I start, and then building off of that. And like other people have said, finding something they're passionate about. For my main character, it's roller coasters, but it can be so many different things for so many different children. But yeah, I think that's the emotions is always where I start.
I just realized that I forgot to say my pronouns when I introduced myself too. There, he, him, his. Brie, I feel like you said this in the question like so eloquently, but I just think that middle schoolers are complex and that they are dealing with lots of big things around them. And because my book is it's fictional, but there's so much of me in that main character. So much of my process was going back to what it was like when I was 12 years old. And I remember thinking at one point, like, I was like, wow, this kid is like struggling with like his cultural identity and his sexual identity and also with OCD behaviors. And I was like, wow, that's a lot for a main character. But then I was like, well, that's what I was dealing with, And so like, why not let him deal with that? And what's been kind of remarkable about that specificity is I think that like so many kids find different aspects of that character that they relate to, because kids are dealing with these big complex issues. And, the thing that I would say was more of a challenge for me was probably filling out the side characters or like the supporting cast. And I found like drafts, like so many of the things that other people have already said were tools to go into those other characters' lives as well, and to say like, oh, they have big things too. Like they have hopes, they have wants, they have dreams. What are they fighting for in scenes? I'm an actor before I am an author, and I feel like that acting training of like, who are you and what do you want, which has already been spoken about, was so useful in finding out in making these characters three-dimensional. And I think that's what it is that in middle school, the things that you want are pretty big. They just change over time, and they might seem bigger to us as adults, but a 12-year-old, the things that they're rooting for are pretty complex and pretty big.
I think like you touched on something that I'm always curious about when I think about things I want to talk about with authors. Talking about kind of drawing inspiration from your own life. And I'm really kind of curious, how much of yourself do you put into your characters? Is that something that you're aware of, that's intentional? Do you ever read a character later and be like, ooh, I might have revealed myself a little bit? Or, are you pulling that inspiration from other places?
I'll start on this one. So for me, I have two main characters in my book, Brian and Ezra. There's a little bit of me in both of them, probably more in Ezra. And it was interesting. I mean, he's biracial. He's wrestling with his sexuality. Big basketball, music fan. Those were all things I was at that age too. But for me, it was actually he was the character that took me more time to write. I think like Brian's story came really easily. I almost had to give myself permission to write Ezra a little bit, and part of that is he's so much more free in who he is, and I didn't grow up that way in a pretty conservative religious environment, and I found it liberating actually to write Ezra's character as I got into it. That the more I let him kind of be himself, it was almost like I was sort of giving my 13-year-old self permission sort of after the fact. So I actually, I know it's different for everybody, but for me, it was actually kind of a liberating thing to write a little bit of myself into a character in my book.
I mean, for me, there's some obvious parallels that Anna and I are both figure skaters and we're both non-binary. But I actually had never heard the term non-binary until my late 20s, and Anna's obviously 12. So that is a little bit different. And also just the fact that I didn't have any representation like this when I was growing up. So it was more of kind of this hope that I was writing something that if I had been 12, or if I was 12 now and I saw it, it would have connected with me and given me the vocabulary I needed to really figure out who I was. So with respect to Anna's internal journey of trying to figure out herself, there's a little bit of me in there, and the question like, who am I? And how do I define who I am in a way that's comfortable for me while still getting to do the things I love, like skating, even though that's a very gendered sport. My family also moved around a lot when I was a kid, and I had a mom and a dad, whereas Anna's part of a single parent household with just a mom. So our finances were a little bit different. And I grew up in more rural areas of the country in the upper Midwest and the South, whereas Anna lives in San Francisco. I moved to San Francisco when I was an adult. So there was this kind of aspect where I wanted to explore what it would be like for a kid to grow up in a city that's very progressive, and her coach is gay, so she's aware of the queer community, but still doesn't have the words to describe who she is within it. And like my own life, obviously, I didn't quite have that growing up. I wasn't really aware of the queer community, or if I was, it was hard for me to connect with it in the same way that Anna's able to. So I definitely pull from my own life, but Anna's story is also her own.
Just to echo like so many of the things that have already been said as well, but there's so much of me in the main character in my book. But like AJ was saying, the character becomes a character too. Like there's a point where it starts to depart from me, and it's like, oh, this is who Rahul is. And one of I think the most exciting parts about writing for me is when that happens, and it's like the character starting to talk to you and tell you what he or she or they want to be, and so that's like really cool. But just to answer your question about what it's like to put so much of yourself on the page, it can be really, really scary. I think Rahul struggles with these OCD like behaviors, and I struggled with those kinds of behaviors as a 12-year-old, and I was really good at hiding it. And so much of my family didn't even know that was a thing, or if they knew about it from who I am as an adult, they didn't realize the extent of it that I dealt with it as a kid. And I remember going on book tour and talking about that, and having family at bookstores, and it's like, wow, there's a process of revealing yourself that can be uncomfortable, but hopefully it's for also the greater good of the story, and also the way it's going to impact an audience. And so now I'm actually working on a second book right now, and when I get that feeling, when I'm like, ooh, wow, this was a little too open, I'm like, that's probably a good thing. For now, try to go there and let's see what happens, because I think that's the process of being an artist, is the more you can reveal about yourself, the more people are going to relate to it.
Yeah, for sure. So much of what people said I agree with, but I think a huge part of it for me wasn't just thinking about what I was like as a middle schooler, which was a big part of it. But I think an even bigger part was sort of retconning what had happened to me as a middle schooler, and thinking okay, I had an intense friendship with this girl all through middle school that, looking back on it now, I fully understand was a crush, but I didn't then. And so it's a lot of hypotheticals that, if I had known I was allowed to explore them in middle school, would have made my life as an adult probably a lot easier. Things like, okay, what if this really is a crush? Or, like, what if these people who are roommates, like, actually are dating, and how do I talk to them about this? And so I think it's not only bringing aspects of myself that I felt so deeply as a middle schooler, but also asking myself questions and interrogating sort of internalized issues that I had as a tween, and things that I wish I had done differently, because I would never want to project those feelings onto kids now.
I would say I do this a lot, like, unintentionally, and then I read back and I'm just like, Clarabelle. For Ghost Squad, it was really inspired by losing my brother, and like there was a lot of grief that was part of the story. But and then for This Is Our Rainbow, the short story is like really, really sort of like inspired by a lot of the things that took up a lot of my time as a kid. And so in the story, there's a kid named Flor who is sort of grappling with the fact that they like somebody that's a girl, and they're not sure how to tell her. And at the same, it's magical realism. So at the same time, she's throwing these paper planes out into the world, because that is how her family communicates with the outside world, because nobody speaks English but her, which is like what it's like being an immigrant, like a child of immigrants. Like, you have to communicate for your parents. But then what ends up happening is she strikes up a friendship with this drag queen who moved in across the street, and through that friendship, Flor starts to sort of discover, like, it's okay to be myself. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, why did I pick, of all things, a drag queen? And then I started thinking, like, oh, the first, like Chad, I grew up in a very conservative household. The first access that I had to any queer community was To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, which I watched a billion times as a kid. It was the first time that I knew anything like that existed. So I learned a lot about myself just because of that movie. And then when I wrote the short story, I realized, like, oh, that's why. So yeah, the short story is like very reflective of like me as a kid and what I dealt with growing up, but also, like Jake, retconning it a little bit and giving Flor sort of like the happiness that I didn't get to experience as a kid, because I didn't know how to call any of these things out or like know how I was feeling. So Flor has the language and is given the language, and they're able to express themselves because of it. And I just wanted them to be happy.
I love that. And I think, like, just adding on to what you've all said about like that opportunity to kind of create an alternate story, for middle grade. I know that I have several like queer identified students in my classroom, and they're so drawn to these stories to be able to see like a voice and a representation. So, I mean, I think that like middle grade stories, I feel like were really overlooked for a while or underestimated. And but kids are really smart, and they're sophisticated readers, and they can tell when authors are like patronizing them or talking down to them at all. And so how do you, like, as authors, how do you build out a rich plot that kind of hits that sweet spot of, being complex and fulfilling for students, recognizing, the complex realities that they exist in, and that are engaging and entertaining for younger readers? Are there any tricks of the trade? Or what do you think might make or break like a great middle grade story?
I'll take that. I was like looking around. I was like, wait, who's gonna tell me the tricks? Because I need some. I mean, I don't. If there are tricks, I don't know them. I wish I did, because certainly, like, I feel like certainly like plotting out a novel can be pretty challenging. It's, you know, I know where I want to start and I know where I want to get to, and there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in between, a lot of other characters, and every now and then, you know, my experience, and I'm working on my second book right now, but my experience has always been like when I sit down with that outline, it's like really short, and I'm like, this is never going to be enough to be a book. And then suddenly, when I get to like chapter 28, I'm like, oh wait, I have so much, and now I know it's going to be like too long. And then for me, the process of drafts is like, at least with the first book, the second draft got even bigger, and then the third draft was like boom, 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 and I had all this stuff, and I could cut it down, so I bring all this up to say that I think part of it is trying stuff out, and like being willing to say like, I'm going to write this really cheesy scene, and it might be really bad, and maybe it is going to be condescending and pandering, but then maybe there's something in there that I can hold on to and rewrite it and turn it into something that's really beautiful, hopefully, you know. And but I also do, you know, just go back to like, so much of my process, I think, is trying to live inside the characters. And for me, I'm so curious, like I want to know if this is what it's like for other authors on this panel, but it can actually be kind of physically exhausting to write, because it's like you're living inside this person, and then they're having a fight, and, you know, your whole body's tense. And whenever I'm going through that, I'm like, well, there's something authentic that's happening here. So even if there's like parts of the writing that feel like it might not be as complex yet as it needs to be, there's a nugget of something in there that can grow into something else. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but hopefully it gets close close to it.
I can't really say many tricks of the trade other than I agree with what Malik's saying, and also it's really helpful to get other eyes on your manuscript during the drafting process, because sometimes you can get so in your head about something and you think you've caught everything, but just getting other eyes on it, you get different perspectives. They can tell you, hey, this doesn't really ring authentic for me, and then you get to assess whether it rings authentic for you. And I think too, the fact that a lot of us are writing books with queer themes in them, I think it can get easy for people to think that we're only writing issues books, and that the entire book is going to be about this kid either coming out or something related to a queer identity. And as Brie mentioned, kids are very complex. Even if they are trying to figure out who they are, that's not the only thing that's going on in their lives. So I think the important part is creating a narrative that is true to this emotional journey while not neglecting the fact that there's external stuff going on as well. Like, to use an example of my book, obviously, Anna's working towards some figure skating goals. And those actually knock up against the gender identity because of what's going on in her skating career. But I think if it were just a story about her trying to figure out who she was and identity, it would not be as complex and as rich as it needs to be to really engage students and readers.
Yeah, I'm sort of going back to something Malik was saying. The Almost Flying started as a like internal monologue exercise. I had written from the perspective of the main character, like a 10-page internal monologue, and very like in their head flowing. It was like a playwriting assignment actually for a class I'd been taking, and it was just write until like for either 4 hours straight with no stopping, or write like 10 pages of an internal monologue of this character. And I was writing about this character who was queer, and watching roller coaster POV videos and grappling with a crush. And so that was sort of the genesis of this story. And I think that had always been sort of my guiding light when writing the first draft, because I was really thinking about that voice. And I think a lot of times people either enjoy or really dislike my writing voice, because it's like, oh, that sounds like you when you talk, and it's exactly how you write. And like, yes, it is exactly how I write, because like, to me, that's how I'm able to get into the character's voice, is if it's something I can say out loud. And if it's like when I'm writing a fight scene, or when I'm writing a scene where it's like awkward and they're, you know, the crush and the main character are talking, like I'm feeling those emotions and I'm writing those emotions out. And so I think it's never, I do have an outline and I do have, you know, the planning that I do, but it's always so voice driven what I write. And so I think when I'm thinking about writing, it's so hard for me to start a story unless I have the voice of the main character. So that's sort of the first thing for me, and then everything else follows. Yeah.
Oh, did you want to go, Chad?
Go ahead.
Okay. I also very much feel the things that I'm writing. Malik, you're not alone. There's a friendship breakup in Witchlings, and I started crying as I was like writing it. Because friendship breakups are so hard, just in general, and at that age, they're so difficult to deal with. For me, uh, I really start from a place of character when it comes to writing my books, and sort of like, what does my character need in order to sort of overcome this thing or change by the end of the story? Like, what do I have to put them up against? Like, what do they have to overcome? And then that helps me sort of build the plot, and gives me a guideline of sorts. And also, like AJ was saying, you know, like everyone has been saying, I was very passionate about so many things in middle grade. So to write a book where they don't have like hobbies and music that they love and like things that they're really into, wouldn't feel true to like the middle schooler that I was, because like I was really into so many different things. So I always make sure to like give them hobbies and to like mention like what's their favorite band and like all these things that might not necessarily have anything to do with the plot, but that helps them feel more well-rounded and like an actual kid, and not just somebody who has sort of like tunnel vision to like one thing, because that can feel heavy-handed, like the author's hand, you could see it on the page. So for me, that's what I use to try to make it feel more authentic.
I was really hoping you all would tell me how to write a perfect plot. Yeah, I'm like Malik actually. You know, I tend to write a lot in my first draft. I kind of just describe it as throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And a lot of it is just figuring out that character. I almost sometimes end up figuring out the plot afterward, which is not the most efficient way to write a book sometimes, but seems to be what works for me. Um, I think the one thing I would add is it can't be too tidy. Middle schoolers know that life is not, everything can't just be a happily ever after right at the very end, especially, when you're writing about things like family issues or your gender or sexuality, because some of those things will go on to change after the end of the book, right? Like kids, what you decide who you are at 12 is not necessarily going to be who you are at 16 or 24. So I think middle schoolers can tell if it's too tidy and everything resolves too neatly, because they know that life isn't really like that.
Yeah, they do not want it all tied up with a bow for them. They definitely want to chew on something. Something that we've all like heard a lot is that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But I can tell you, after almost a decade of watching kids in the library, they definitely judge a book by its cover. So I'm kind of curious, what was the process like for you in coming up with the cover for your book? Was there anything special that you wanted to have on there that was symbolic for your story? What was that process like for each of you?
I can go first for this one. For me, for some visual aid, I'll put it up here. But I think even my friends who had read incredibly early drafts knew that this would be what the illustration on the cover would be from the very beginning. It's sort of the only option, I guess. It's so about roller coasters, and the book, so it makes sense for roller coasters. And this scene where the two characters are holding hands. Oop! Oh no, it's backwards. I'm moving it further and further out of the screen. Is very important to the book, and I think having that shown on the cover, it's not incredibly noticeable that the two girls are holding hands, but like it's very cool to see on a middle grade cover. And it just made me very happy to see. So I think that process was very easy, because we knew what the illustration on the cover was, and Marcos Chin was the cover illustrator, and he did a fantastic job. And I also, I think, have to write a spin-off about the elusive woman behind the L and her husband perhaps behind the F. So get ready for that to come out later.
So they asked me a bunch of questions for like character description for my covers for both of my covers, and my first cover for Ghost Squad was made by Lorena Alvarez Gomez, who is a Colombian illustrator. Really, really cool. And it's just the two main characters, and then Chunk, which is like the standout character of this book. And then Lorena couldn't do the cover for Witchlings, which is my next book, but we got Lissy Marlin, who is a Dominican illustrator like me, and that was really exciting. And so I don't have an art yet, but I think you guys can sort of see the cover a little bit. Um, Maybe it can like be put on the screen or something, but it it has the three witchlings on it and like the town of Ravenskill, which is based on Peekskill, New York, and is a really important part of the story. And they just gave her like told her what the story was about, and she ran with it, and she did like a perfect job. I knew they were going to put the characters on the cover. I love seeing like brown kids as main characters, and to see them on the covers of my books, I would have like not known what to do with myself as a kid if I had, options like that. So that was really great, and you can see all of the characters sort of like personalities, which was really fun too.
Yeah, for me, I gave some description of the characters. We talked a few different ideas with my editor, but the artist Nick Blanchard actually came back with something really different, and I just loved it right away. Sort of the two characters kind of on opposite sides. Ezra kind of upside down. Like it's so striking and catching. Like the image, I just really I loved it right away as soon as I saw it. And the first time I saw it in color, just to go on what Clarabelle was saying, I read a ton as a kid. I read Encyclopedia Brown and the Hardy Boys and Gordon Corman, who's a big Canadian author. I'm Canadian, and but never saw any kids who look like me on covers of books. So I wasn't actually prepared for how emotional I felt when I saw the cover and I saw Ezra up there in the corner. So that really meant a lot to me, and I think for kids that it really does mean something to pick up a book where you see somebody who looks like you on the cover.
I can hop in here. My editor, there's like wait, my editor reached out to this amazing artist named Parvati Pillai, who I had never met. I believe she lives in Finland. We like never met, and I believe they sent her the first draft of my book, which I was horrified about. I was like, what? But I believe they sent her the first draft, and we never communicated. And she sent back a version that was like really, really close to what this is. And I was like, wow, she gets it. I mean, to speak, to your first question or to many of the questions that we've been talking about the complexity of middle schoolers, I was like, look at all the stuff he's dealing with. Like it's literally like everything's coming flying at him, and he's reaching for that trophy. And I love that he does it like it's out of reach, but also like not even in the right line. There was just like so many things about it that I was like, this is so perfect and so beautiful. And to just speak to what Chad and Clarabelle were talking about, the skin color was like important to me. I was like, I want to make sure that he looks Indian, and also that he looks nerdy. Like I was like let's give him like all the things, like let's make the lead not look like what we think a lead character looks like. Let's redefine what a lead character of a book looks like. And so she really nailed it. And in terms of the color, I was also like, I want it to be really colorful, both as a nod to, I think, the way the LGBTQIA plus community celebrates who we are, but also I think Indian culture is really colorful, and I wanted that to be reflected in the book. There's even a pair of samosas right here on the cover, which I love.
I just have to say, I love the aunties in your book so much. Like that's what makes me think about color.
Oh my gosh! Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that. Thanks.
Aunties are always like A plus when they're added to any book, like a fave.
So for my cover, I'm not a very visual person, and I needed a little bit of handholding from my publisher. They went through, I want to say, about 7 sketches with one illustrator named Ellen Shee, who actually has a background in figure skating and had read the manuscript, so she was really enthusiastic about it. And the in-house design team at Little Brown, I believe my main point of contact there was Angelique Yap, who dealt with the cover design. And her initial concept that she wanted Ellen to work on was a skater that you're seeing from behind stepping out into a spotlight. And I'm autistic and very literal minded. So my first response was skaters don't skate under spotlights. Usually that's just like not what we do. That's like a bad, so that's like an idea that people have of the sport that's not actually accurate. And yeah, my editor had to be very kind about like the whole, there is something like about figurative language and imagery here. And looking back at the book too, there's a point when Anna realizes she's non-binary where she makes this observation that coming out feels like stepping out into the light after hiding someplace dark, which I think really kind of is encapsulated by the way this book cover came out. The other thing that I really like about it, which is a little subtle, but I think some people have noticed, is that it's actually in the non-binary flag colors, which are yellow, white, black, and purple. So I don't know if that was their intention, but if not, they really nailed that too. So it took a little coming around to the whole spotlight thing, but I got there eventually. And when I saw it for the first time, when my arcs came in and I got to hold it in my hands, that was a really emotional experience for me as well.
I'm literally crying because I didn't realize the NP flag was on the cover, and I love that so much. That makes
I
me
don't think
so
I did
happy.
either. I think someone else pointed it out to me, and I was like, "Oh wow, okay, yeah." I'm not a visual person, but as soon as I saw it, now I can't unsee it. So I think it's great. Every time I look at it, my heart swells a little bit.
Oh. So, I kind of want to move to this question that one of my students actually wrote, and just bringing up the flag and the representation. I think it's fits in really well. So this is from one of my 5th grade students, and they asked, "What is it like making books about LGBTQ plus kids? I know that some people think that kids are too young to know, but I'm part of LGBTQ plus, and I know very well."
I'd say that it's an honor to be able to do this for kids. And, sometimes you do come up against like resistance from people. I remember like when our anthology was announced, like we immediately got 1-star reviews on Goodreads from people just because the book was queer and for middle grade kids. But that just makes me even more determined and happy to write for them, because if we as adults are coming up against this pushback, imagine how they are feeling as children. So I am happy to write these books for them. I feel really honored, and I feel like, do you guys know that meme that's like the giant muscular bunny next to like the little bunny? Yeah. So I feel like we're protecting them like as a whole, and like we're helping them to see that they're not alone. And for a lot of us, giving them access to something that we didn't have as children. So I feel very like a lot of affection towards our readers, and a lot of like I want to protect them with our stories, and like tell them that they're going to be okay. So for me, it's super fun. I feel lucky to be able to do it, and I'm happy. I'm happy to have this opportunity to write for kids like your student.
Yeah, I think it's not just like an honor, which it is such a big honor when I think about it. But to me, I also feel like I have something to prove to them, because I think I'm so awed by children like your student who know that about themselves so young and are so unabashed about who they are. And I think we owe it to these children, and not just the kids who don't know who they are, who, I mean, I definitely didn't, but also the kids who definitely do, to tell them stories where they feel seen and understood, and where they think like, oh, this is just another aspect of my identity or another person's identity that I can read about. And I think it's something I've had to interrogate in myself, where a lot of what the original ideas that I was thinking about were mostly coming out stories. And I think I've started to want to move past that, not just because that's not always what I'm interested in reading, but also because I know so many middle schoolers who are like, yeah, I came out when I was like 6. Why do I need another coming out story? Like, I want a story about like my queer friends, like going to the movies and like getting in fights. Like, also, I just realized my cat has been there the whole time. So sorry about that. But yeah, I guess that's kind of all I have to say, and I'm a little embarrassed that my cat's been there the whole time.
We love cats.
Yeah, I'll build on that. It's an honor. I remember the first time I read a middle grade book with a queer character, and I thought, man, I wish I had a time machine. I could send this book back to like 11-year-old me. So yeah, I'm conscious of that, but also really, yeah, kids today are so much more just open and curious about so many things that it's less of a big deal in the sense of, as Jake said, that yeah, just why couldn't a queer kid also be in a magic story or a mystery story, right? Like, so I'm the same. I want to, as I get to write more books, want to just plop queer kids into every story because they belong in any story that they want to be in.
I'll chime in and say it's a really big honor. And for me, it's also kind of sending a message to them to say, hey, I see you. And also just giving them an example of an adult who is out and open in their personal and their private life and is thriving. Because I think when I was a kid, I didn't see that ever. So there, even when I had a sense that I was different and that I might be queer, I didn't see any examples of adults that people looked up to and respected that I could kind of hope to emulate one day. And I hope that's changing now in a lot of different forms of media, not just writing. But for me, it's just I just really want them to know that they're seen, they're loved, and that it's just an utter honor to get to write for them because their generation is going to be amazing. I already know it.
At 12, I think I knew too, just like your student, but I had no language or context to be able to put that into words. I didn't know a single openly gay person. What I did know was that there were like some faculty members that the students would laugh about behind their back, or I remember hearing a joke on the radio about gay people in carpool in middle school and sitting in the back of that car and being like, I feel like that joke's about me, even though I didn't know how to put that together, And so for me, I feel like, like Chad was saying, like to be able to write a character where an LGBTQIA+ kid can see themselves in a book and be like, oh, that is my experience. I actually can understand myself better because I have seen it reflected back to me in a book that I love. That just feels like, to echo the words, it's an honor to get to do that, but it's also like it's a gift. It's a gift that we get to tell these stories to young people. And one of my favorite parts of having written a book is getting to do school visits and literally interacting with young people, whether it's virtually or, my book came out like right before the world shut down. So I actually got to meet middle school students, and, you go into some schools and it's like 20 kids in a classroom, in some schools and it's 700 kids in an auditorium. But something about being able to be authentically myself, not only in what I'm writing, but as who I am when I stand up in front of them, always brings up a kid who wants to be authentically themselves back to me. And that I think is like the most special part about getting to create work for young people that's about these things.
I even as an adult, I love like reading all of these middle grade queer stories that are coming out, and just even as an adult, like feeling like, oh, little me feels seen. And it's something that I think students are really just craving. I can't keep them in stock enough for these kids. I think I've got one more kind of question from a student here that, when you, Malik, talked about like visiting schools and getting to meet these kids, and I have a student that wanted to know, what advice would you give for kids that want to grow up and be writers too?
Well, I will say you definitely want to read a lot, because you can't really get a sense of how stories are told unless you read other stories. And also, it's just fun and enjoyable to do that. One thing to remember about writing that I feel like doesn't get talked about a ton in panels like these is that we are not writing one draft and then publishing the story. We are going through multiple revisions. We are getting feedback from friends and later agents and editors who are all contributing to help make the story better. They're all invested in it in that way. So writing is basically rewriting. I think I've done 12 or 13 drafts before Anna on the Edge became what it is now. And that's normal. I know some people love drafting. I'm not one of them. Like I love the initial spark of an idea, but getting it onto the page the first time is really difficult for me, because in my head it's this perfect masterpiece, and then I start typing and it is like I don't even know, subject, object, verb in English. It's just all a mess in my head, and it comes out on the page like that too. So I think if you want to be a writer, you have to practice your craft, of course, but you also have to be gentle with yourself when you're doing it, because the story needs time to grow and blossom, and maybe that takes a couple months, maybe it takes a couple years, but it's just something that you need to take time with to really get to see what the potential of the story will be.
Those are all tough things, I think, for middle grade students to sometimes accept. But I'm really glad that they're going to hear it from other voices besides mine.
I think on the same lines, patience and perseverance are really important, which is also a little bit of depressing advice. But there are very few overnight successes in publishing. I knew from a really young age I wanted to be a writer. I am 41 and my first book just came out, and I've been writing for years. But some of the stories I'm writing now, I wasn't ready to write 10 or 15 years ago. And you'll just keep getting better too, I think, is another important thing. Keep at it, keep working at it, keep reading, keep writing. If somebody gives you a rejection or says no, go back and write the next thing, and maybe come back to that thing a little bit later. And the other things is one of the earliest books I wrote is actually going to be my second book. I had to put it in a drawer for a long time, but it's going to be coming out next year. So don't give up on things either. Sometimes that character, that story, it just might not be the right time, or you might not have them in the right setting yet, but that doesn't mean that you won't get to see them on the page at some point. So hang on to your ideas, and patience pays off.
I think something that I would always ask this question of authors when they visited my school, as that like precocious, annoying child up at the front of the classroom. And I think it would frustrate me when they would give answers like, don't give up, follow your dreams. Not that I think anyone else has been saying that, but this is what I would do as a middle schooler. And I think that this is a fun thing to do to improve your craft. So, and I do this, I have a 10-year-old brother, and we do this together sometimes. So what I do is we open up a Google Doc, we brainstorm like 10 ideas, we each write down sentences of what we want to like tell a story about. It could be really silly, it could be something nonfiction from your own life, something like a magical idea, whatever you want it to be. And then you like take turns writing the story. So it doesn't have to be at the same time. It could be after school. I don't know if your students have like Chromebooks. I know my brother sometimes has those, like using them for Google Docs. So take turns. You'll see they might have added a paragraph. You could add another paragraph. And I think it's like one of the most fun things to do with friends. Not necessarily during school. I know my brother has done it like during class, which I can't like recommend, but I mean, it's not the worst thing to be doing during class, but it's so much fun to collaborate with people, to see their ideas, to get to write, to get to come up with ideas, to like tell a story, to take it in unexpected directions and force people to write into that. I think that's like a really fun exercise that is something you can do like right now.
I'll be stealing that and using that in my classroom. Thank you.
Yeah, my suggestion was actually going to be close to what Jake said, which is like, don't be afraid to like share your writing with other people, even if it's just your friends. Because especially like if you're writing for a very long time when you're younger, like when it gets time to like share your writing, it can be really scary because you're not used to it and you're used to like writing by yourself. So I used to share my writing like with my friends. Like we all used to write like bring the stories in like our notebooks and like share it with each other and like give each other feedback, and it could be brutal, but um, yeah, 12-year-olds don't care. But I super suggest doing something like that. Like if you write something, like share the Google Doc with like your friend, like see it, like what they think, and like also write like what you wish you could see, right? Like write the thing that you would love to read and that like interests you, like put all the stuff that you love into your writing, because readers who like all the same stuff are going to find your books that way, and they're going to love the things that you like to write, and you'll find your people in that way, because that's what I do. I just like put all the stuff like I want to read about in my books, and it works out.
I love everything that everyone has said. I was like, I don't know if I can even add anything to this, but I guess I would add two things maybe. I think because I'm an actor as well as an author, I think of myself as a storyteller, and I think if I'm on stage or if I'm in a sound booth doing a cartoon or if I'm on a television set or if I'm writing a book, it's all about like telling a story. And I get it from young kids a lot of like, I want to be an actor. Like, what do you have to do to be on TV? And I imagine young kids too who want to write, they're like, how do you get a book published? But the thing is, you have to act and you have to write to be an actor or to be a writer. And so I just say, like, think of yourself as a storyteller in whatever medium that is. If you have a phone that makes videos and you want to like write a little script and go out and film it, that's writing and that's acting. Like that's being a storyteller. Like find avenues to explore your creativity and don't limit yourself to one thing that you think you might want to do, because there's so much out there for young writers. There's so many places that your writing can show up. So I would say that. And the other thing I would say is like stay open to the world, because I feel like we've all been talking about this a little bit, but we talk about, filling out these characters and giving them hobbies and, exploring their relationships. And to be able to write about that, you have to have experienced that. You have to, this is going to sound a little like self-serving, but like when an emotional moment happens in your life, you have to be present for it. You can't be like on your computer ignoring it, or on your phone like texting and ignoring it, because then how are you going to write about it later? So stay present in the world as well, and like think about the relationships in your life and how they function, and think about your hobbies and why they're important to you, and think about those things that make you feel passionate about stuff, because that's all going to show up in your writing at some point in your life.
I'm going to be reporting all of this to my students. Some of it they're going to love, and some of it, yeah, they'll like reading more. They may not like having to do multiple drafts, but I think you have some excellent advice, all of you. Thank you. Looking at this, like looking at, these skills and steps that it takes to like become a good writer. When you look back on your craft, what aspect of your writing do you think has improved most? Have you improved in over time? Are there any like resources that helped you kind of in that journey?
I think for me, one is writing dialogue, just writing how people talk. A couple things. I was a journalist for a long time, so I would interview people and listen to a lot of people, and so that's part of it. Part of it is just, particularly for middle grade, I coach basketball, so I'm around a lot of middle graders, and I get to listen to how they talk and the jokes they tell, and so that for me is helpful too in terms of capturing that authentic voice. In terms of craft, for me, it's just, again, it's listening. Like Malik said, I think it's really important just to pay attention to the world around you, and also just reading. Sometimes seeing what other people do really well. I mean, again, I grew up on a steady diet of Gordon Corman, who writes very funny books and lots of snappy dialogue. So those kind of things are an influence as well.
I think it was Clarabelle who said, recommended that you share your writing with your friends. I was not someone who was comfortable doing that when I was younger. So it was actually Anna on the Edge, which is the first manuscript that I actually sought feedback from other people on. And I've gotten much better at doing that now. When I got feedback initially from Anna, I felt like, oh, if there's anything that they send me back, it means I failed as a writer because I didn't catch this on my own. And that's absolutely not true. At this point, I'm on my third full-length novel, and I'm just like, point out everything you can spot that's wrong, and I will figure out how to fix it. But I mean, it's been a process to get to this point where I'm comfortable sharing my writing when it might not even be the most polished I feel like I can do, because publishing often has very tight deadlines, and you sometimes just can't polish something to perfection before sending it sometimes. So that's been a learning process for me. And I think also just being gentler with myself on early drafts. I have a really hard time, at least initially, trying to complete manuscripts. I do outline to an extent, but it's still, there's this little needling self-doubt about whether I'll actually be able to get to the end of a story when I'm in the midst of a first draft. And I've gotten much better at just accepting the fact that this is going to happen no matter what I'm writing, or no matter how well I've outlined it, and just sort of accepting that and acknowledging that I'm feeling that way, but continuing to push through it.
I think for me, I am able to take feedback without being devastated now. Like feedback is just like, okay. Whereas before I would like grapple with like having to cut something. I'd be so emotional about it. And I was like, I don't have time to have a breakdown about this edit letter. I just need to do it. And like, I remember like, I just handed in a draft of a book last week, Monday. And there was like, there were things that I had to cut, and I was just like, okay. And I would just cut it or be like, no, because of this. And like, when I first started writing, it was so much harder for me to do that. I would have to like stew over like, what if I cut this? It's going to make the scene not the same. I'm just able to like take feedback a lot better now, which comes with like practice. And that's helped me to just be able to like write quicker and like make my writing tighter, because I'm not being like so precious about everything that I write. As long as like the important stuff is there, and you have to know what to push back on too. Like, it's not like you listen to what everybody says about your book and change every single thing. You have to have a very strong sense of like, this is what's important to my story versus not, and this is what I'm going to accept as feedback versus I'm gonna push back on this a little bit. So knowing myself as a writer and being able to take feedback without being like a Pisces about it for like 3 weeks, that has changed a lot.
Claire, well, I'm an Aquarius, but I felt that deeply in my soul.
I can share like two things that I feel like I learned along the way writing the best at it, and one, and I think I'm better at it now. But one is like writing a scene from the inside as opposed to the outside, and for me that's a lot of like, especially if I think the scene's going to add some levity to the book, being like, this would be really funny, and sort of forgetting that it's still about a character who wants something, and the scene exists in the book for a reason. And what I learned was that the more honest I can be about a character driving towards something that they wanted, the funnier it would end up being. And if I tried to write something like that was, this is going to be a funny scene, it often was not. So just tell the truth. I think I've gotten better about telling the truth and being like inside a character's perspective. And then just to echo what AJ and Clarabelle said, I am like the lead character in this book, like a pretty big perfectionist. And I remember turning in like the final draft where it was like, my editor was like, you can make a few little notes if you want. She literally was like, you have to come to my office to turn these in because I don't trust that you're not gonna like try to rewrite the whole book. And it's like you have all these pages, and she's like, if you touch one thing, the copy editor has to go back and redo the whole. And I was like, yeah, but I just like don't know if the ending. And then she was like, no, and like grabbed it out of my hands. And I'm hoping that with the second novel, I will be less of a perfectionist, and I think that I have gotten better about taking feedback as well. But the letting go process, the saying like, oh, someone actually said this is good, and I can let go of this. That's something I'm certainly still working on.
If we don't have time, I won't go, but I can just quickly add, echoing what everyone else has said, but also I think giving myself permission to write dialogue the way actually heard people talk was something that took a little bit of time for me, because I think for some reason I think dialogue is my strongest, the strongest aspect of my writing, but it never was before, because I would always write these like very like, oh, it's like prose and there's no dialogue. And I think understanding for myself, you know, sometimes when I'm reading, if I'm tired, I'm just skipping down the page to the next line of dialogue. And like, I think understanding that, I just giving myself permission to listen to how people talk and write that way, and listen to how I talk and the natural tics in my voice, and, you know, taking out some of the more erroneous parts of that, but still thinking about how people talk and giving people different voices that separate them and make them unique is something I feel like I've improved on and given myself permission to have more fun with than I did when I was first starting out.
Thank you. It's so interesting to hear just kind of the differences and, you know, what you felt like your strengths or weaknesses were, and the ways that you've improved. I think that's a really like important thing for like not just like students, but like anyone who's interested in writing to hear and realize that like it's going to get better and they're going to, you know, keep improving on those things. I have a question here that, and several of you have hinted at this already, but I have a student that really wants to know, do you plan on making more books about queer kids? And can you maybe, what are some of those like hopes or plans that you might have for some future stories?
Well, Witchlings, my next book, comes out in February, and it's like a book that explores the question, what happens if the sorting hat put you nowhere? And in the book, there are non-binary characters, there are queer characters, and it is sort of like I took like the Schitt's Creek approach to sort of like no homophobia in the world at all. People are discriminated against for different reasons, like magical abilities, but in terms of people who are queer and non-binary and all of that, it's completely accepted and normal, and there's like nothing to really talk about when it comes to that. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited for kids to have sort of like a magic world and like covens to be sorted into and like all that fun stuff, and to know that, you know, if they are, no matter how they identify, they're welcome in the world. So that's my book, and many more to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think there'll always be an aspect of queerness to my work just because that's who I am, and it's very hard for me to separate my identity from my writing, which is very personal to me. Ellen Outside the Lines, which is my next full-length standalone, is not technically about coming out, but there is a non-binary character in it, and Ellen is sort of exploring the idea of using multiple pronouns by the end of the story, which is initially a little difficult for her to wrap her head around because she's autistic and, like me, has a very binary way of seeing the world. She's also exploring, on top of her queer identity, her Jewish identity and how that works in a school that she's part of that's largely Christian. And then my third standalone novel is being co-written with author Nicole Melleby, and it's called Camp Quilt Bags. So I assume just by the title you're aware that it's going to be super queer. It's set at a queer summer youth camp. So it's actually an all queer cast. And I'm not sure if I can beat myself at that and make something queer after that, but I'm certainly up for the challenge and would love to try.
Yeah, I think everything I write is going to be very queer. I think it just sort of when I was in high school, I had a group of friends where none of us were out as queer, but the moment we graduated, we all came out to each other, and I think I sort of emulate that vibe with most of my books, where it's not always there's something drawing these characters together, and it's usually queerness at the very least. All my books will have anxious Jewish queer people in them because that's just the lens through which I see the world. My next middle grade that I just turned a draft in of, that I don't know how much I can say, but it's about Crohn's and anxiety and queerness and many things that I felt like I couldn't delve into in Almost Flying that I'm like excited to talk about in this. And I also have a young adult book that is a sapphic rom-com coming out in 2022 about lesbian Jews at Christmas time. So I always want to write about queer people. That's all I want to do.
Jake, now I'm remembering what you posted on Twitter the other day about what you were thinking about putting in your book. And that made me laugh. A nice little poem about what it's like to suffer with crows. But yeah, it was very
to the tune of Olivia Rodrigo's driver's license. You left out the most important part.
Yeah, for me the same. You know, I just want queerness to be part of what I write, and just as a matter of fact, I guess. You know, again, not necessarily all coming out stories, but you know, I have sort of a different ideas in mind where the characters are just queer and they go on adventures and do other things, and that's just part of it. So I think that's important too. So yeah, I would love to, as long as I get to write books, I will be putting queer characters in them for sure.
Yeah, my next book, we haven't announced it yet, so I won't like give anything away, but it does feature a middle school kid who's Indian American and gay. And you know what I realize is that like there's just like more stories that I want to tell about the experience that never existed in books before. And like until there's like a ton of them out there, I'm probably not going to move on and start writing other things. And it's something that I hear all of us talking about, like how part of our identities are part of what we want to explore, not to put words in people's mouths, but that feels so interesting to me because I feel like that's what was missing for me anyway. I know in the books that I read as a kid, and that's why I feel like it's so important to put them out there. And it's so I feel like we've been conditioned to see certain people as the leads of stories. I touched on this a little bit when I was talking about the cover of my book, but I feel like there's so much work left to do to rewrite that narrative and say like, no, everybody is a lead of their own stories, and we need more leads who look different and identify as different and have different wants and different families, and like let's write more and more and more and more and more books about that, and then maybe I'll be ready to move on to something else.
Well, I've really enjoyed chatting with you all today and hearing some of your insights and inspiration, and I can't wait to read the next books that you put out too. And I know that there are going to be a lot of eager hands in my classroom too. I think it's just so valuable and so important to see that representation, and for our middle grade students to be able to see themselves in these stories. So thank you so much to Chad, to Jake, Malik, Clarabelle, and AJ. We are so glad that you were able to join us for this great conversation. Can you tell us where can our readers find more information about you and your work?
I'm at Clarabelle_Ortega on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, everywhere that you might be going on social media. And my website is clarabelleortega.com, and all of my info on my books and are on there. You can also write me letters if you want. I have a P.O. box and I'll write you back.
I'm Chad G.A. Lucas on Twitter and Instagram. Haven't done TikTok yet. And my website is chadlucaswrites.com.
My website is sass, like my last name, in sf.com. And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and just marginally on TikTok at Matoka, Matokah.
I am at Malik Pancholi on Instagram and Twitter, and malikpancholi.com is my website. And you can send me an email there.
I'm Jake Who's a Girl on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Though on my TikTok, you are just going to find videos of my cat and my girlfriend. But if that's the content you want, feel free to follow. Website's also jakewho'sagirl.com, and my book just came out as you're watching this. So please request it from your library or buy it, or think good thoughts about it. And also email me if you read it, or if you have thoughts, or if you hate me. I would love to read your emails.
It's so good. Go buy it.
Yay!
Woo! All right. Well, thank you. And so I'm Mix Bree. You can find me on Instagram and on TikTok at mix.readtherainbow. If you want to hear some great reviews about these books, it'll be posted by the time this is airing. And thank you so much for joining us at Pride Book Fest 2021.